Occupied France, August 1943. In the grey hours before dawn, on a remote Luftwaffe airfield carved out of the French countryside and hidden from Allied reconnaissance, Oberstingenieur Karl-Heinz Werner, senior technical officer of Jagdgeschwader 26, received news that on paper sounded like a triumph. An American P-47 fighter had been forced down during a combat mission, its pilot captured alive, and, most importantly, the aircraft itself had landed without catastrophic damage. For months, German intelligence had been desperate for such a prize. Now it lay on their runway, silent and waiting. For frontline pilots, this was a curiosity. For Werner, it was something far more dangerous. For nearly a year, Luftwaffe combat reports had described encounters with a massive American fighter that seemed to violate every principle German engineers held sacred. Pilots complained that it was too fast at altitude, too durable under fire, and disturbingly difficult to kill. Many dismissed these reports as exaggeration born of stress. Werner never did. He trusted numbers more than morale, metallurgy more than slogans, and now, finally, the enemy's mathematics stood before him in aluminum and steel. Werner was not a man shaped by dogfights or aerial heroics. He was an engineer, trained before the war, forged in wind tunnels and test facilities rather than cockpits. His responsibility was cold and analytical. Dismantle enemy machines, understand their logic, and expose the weaknesses Germany could exploit. Yet the moment he stepped onto the tarmac and saw the captured American fighter in full daylight, his professional detachment faltered. The aircraft looked obscene. Its fuselage was grotesquely thick, swollen around an engine that seemed better suited for a bomber than a fighter. It sat low on its landing gear like a bloated animal at rest, radiating mass and excess. German pilots had already given it a nickname spoken with equal parts contempt and disbelief: the flying milk barrel. Standing before it, Werner understood why. Nothing about the machine suggested elegance, efficiency, or restraint. It looked crude, almost insulting, as if the Americans had abandoned aeronautical refinement altogether. At first glance, it seemed impossible that such a thing could fly, let alone dominate the skies. But as Werner would soon learn, the aircraft was not a failure of design. It was a declaration of industrial intent. Fully loaded, the P-47 approached 8 tons. Germany's primary fighter, the Focke-Wulf 190, weighed barely half that. The difference was not incremental, it was philosophical. The American aircraft was built around an enormous radial engine, its bulk explaining the fighter's unnatural proportions. Everything about it suggested excess material, excess power, excess confidence. Germany built aircraft at the limits of scarcity. America built them as if scarcity did not exist. Werner began where all engineers begin, at the heart. When technicians removed the cowling, revealing the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double wasp, the inspection team fell into an uneasy silence. 18 cylinders, arranged in 2 rows, formed a mechanical core of intimidating density. Yet size alone did not disturb Werner, it was the finish. The machining quality was extraordinary. Surfaces were flawless. Tolerances were tight and consistent. This was not rushed wartime production, it was industrial mastery executed at scale. Werner began calculating almost instinctively. Displacement, airflow, compression ratios, the figures converged on an unavoidable conclusion. The engine was producing over 2,000 horsepower, possibly more when boosted. Germany's most advanced operational engines struggled to approach 1,700 horsepower, often at the cost of reliability. Worse still, German factories achieved those figures only through compromises forced by shortages. The Americans had made no such compromises. Werner searched obsessively for evidence of corner cutting, substitute alloys, simplified components, anything that hinted at desperation. He found none. The engine was built with premium materials, advanced bearings, and a design philosophy that assumed constant maintenance, abundant spare parts, and uninterrupted production. One mechanic quietly pointed out that individual cylinders could be removed and replaced independently. Werner paused longer than he intended. That single detail spoke volumes. The Americans assumed their aircraft would survive damage, return home, be repaired quickly, and fly again. German designs assumed the opposite. Then Werner noticed what truly tightened his chest with dread: the turbo supercharger. Long ducts carried exhaust gases through the fuselage to a turbine mounted near the rear of the aircraft, spinning at extreme speeds and forcing compressed air back into the engine. The complexity was staggering. Heat-resistant materials, precision bearings capable of surviving tens of thousands of revolutions per minute, exact calibration to avoid catastrophic failure. German engineers had experimented with similar systems and failed repeatedly. Here it was, not as a prototype, not as an experiment, but as standard equipment on a frontline fighter. With this system, the P-47 could maintain full engine power at altitudes where German fighters were choking on thin air. Above 25,000 feet, the FW190 and BF109 lost speed, climb rate, and maneuverability. The American fighter, meanwhile, was entering its ideal combat envelope. It was not merely surviving at altitude, it was thriving. When an assistant finally asked whether Germany could replicate such a system, Werner did not soften the truth. Not with existing resources, not with current factories, not while already struggling to replace basic losses. The realization was crushing. Germany had not been out-designed. It had been outproduced before the contest even began. The airframe offered no comfort. The aircraft bore extensive combat damage: cannon strikes, machine gun perforations, structural tears, damage that would have destroyed a German fighter outright. Yet the P-47 had remained controllable. Thick aluminum skin, reinforced internal framing, redundant control systems, and extensive cockpit armor all worked together to absorb punishment. Most critically, the massive radial engine lacked the fragile coolant systems that doomed German inline engines. Cylinders could be shot away and the engine would still run. One engineer muttered that the aircraft was absurdly overbuilt. Werner agreed quietly and added that only a nation drowning in resources could afford such extravagance. The armament inspection extinguished any remaining illusions. 8 heavy machine guns, each fed by hundreds of rounds, delivered a volume of fire that defied comparison. German fighters, lightly armed and lightly built, could not survive a frontal encounter. Werner calculated that a single firing pass could saturate an entire airspace with metal. Accuracy was almost irrelevant. Anything ahead of the aircraft would be destroyed by probability alone. As Werner compiled his report, the true horror emerged not from any single system, but from their integration. Engine, turbo supercharger, airframe, armor, armament. Each component demanded enormous industrial investment. Together, they represented an economy mobilized without restraint. Production figures confirmed the nightmare. Hundreds of P-47s produced monthly. Tens of thousands of identical engines. Factories untouched by bombing. Supply chains that never collapsed. Germany, by comparison, struggled to replace losses while under constant attack. Werner's final report was precise, factual, and fatal. It concluded that Germany lacked the industrial capacity to compete and warned that continued combat under existing conditions would lead to inevitable defeat. The document was forwarded, quietly dismissed, and filed away. Reality was inconvenient. Ideology was easier. In the months that followed, Werner watched the sky fill with American fighters. Losses mounted. Veterans vanished. Tactics changed too late. The air war had become an industrial avalanche, and Germany stood beneath it. After the war, Allied officers asked Werner whether one aircraft truly revealed the outcome of the conflict. He answered calmly that it revealed something more important. Germany could never win a war of factories against the United States. The P-47 was not merely a weapon, it was proof. History vindicated him. More P-47s were built than Germany produced its main fighters combined. American industry drowned Europe in aluminum and steel. And long before the first bombs fell on Berlin, the war had already been decided, not in the skies, but in the factories.